Will and I are here today to talk about to talk as co-founders of Well Leaders. We're really excited to be here and speak about something that's really important that we've heard leaders around the world talk about, especially during this time of remote working and the Omicron variant hitting us now. We're seeing a lot of leaders go back into remote work with their teams and struggling to find that connection. And just quickly before we get into this, I want to introduce ourselves. We are two of the co-founders of Well Leaders, and you might be asking, what is Well Leaders? We offer leadership coaching, training, and support that equips leaders to inspire teams, lead with authenticity, be healthy, and we really want to help leaders be well leaders. Will, thank you for joining me here today.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Great to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about the problems that you're seeing leaders face right now.
Yeah, I think you mentioned at the outset this the Omicron variant, and even before that, the Delta variant, and companies who thought they were bringing workers back to the office, hitting the pause button, sometimes dialing things back when employees already came back. So it's a re-emphasis on remote, it's a re-emphasis on virtual, and creating that team environment, that team cohesion, that connection in a virtual environment has been challenging for anybody who's been doing and leading remote work. So I think we're seeing even more of that. We're hearing that from the leaders that we're talking to.
Yeah, exactly. We've heard that it's really difficult to have those water cooler moments that you normally would have had when people are just signing on to Zoom meetings and signing off, that you aren't walking together to the next meeting. You're not really creating that space to just chat about how your day is going or what you're showing up with, because it's quite easy to hide when you're online.
Yeah, it is. And I know there are introverts out there who are probably rolling their eyes a little bit, but there is still that sense of connection, which even as an introvert, which I am too, you miss that if you don't have kind of a formal plan, or the leader who's leading a meeting doesn't have a formal plan to kind of foster and facilitate that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point, and we can get to that later too. But so I think we're really wanting to make sure in this video, we're wanting to give some tips to support leaders to switch to a role of coaching or questioning around coaching instead of focusing on just getting straight into the to-do list, which you often see leaders do. So tell me, what mistakes do you think, and we can discuss this a bit, what mistakes we see leaders making?
Yeah, I think especially as we're getting here to the end of the year, when we're recording this video, there's planning, maybe there's a sense of urgency to close up work at the end of the year. Leaders jump onto meetings and they jump straight into the tactical, straight into the tasks. Let's talk about all the to-dos, and we'll kick right off with to-do number one. And it makes the feel of the meeting and the relationship and the collaboration very transactional rather than relational. And I pulled a quote in, there's a poet named David White who's actually also an organizational development consultant, which I think is such a cool combination. And he gave an interview and gave the quote, "What I see mainly is that we're under the impression that you're supposed to have conversations in order to get to the work. This is a misapprehension that we have in most organizations now. The conversation is not about the work, it is the work." So that building of relationships, that understanding who's in the team, how do they operate, what are they like, what are they bringing to the table today? If I have to go do some project work with somebody later in the day, do I know how they're showing up today? And in a meeting, that's facilitated well with some of the ideas we're going to talk about. You can do that.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up, that this is less about transactional work, but more about the relationships that we have. There was a really great article that was written recently about looking at research and why employees are unhappy at work. And even though they might be getting incredibly good salary, lots of great benefits, it was more the relational side that they found missing. And I think this is what we're touching on here. people want that connection and that sense of trust and collaboration. And if you're diving straight into meetings, straight into the to-do list without setting the tone or even an agenda for the setting, there's that lack of cohesion and understanding between people that you're less likely to go the extra mile for your fellow teammate.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure there are some people out there who are like, well, we don't have time to build these relationships. We have to talk about the tasks at hand and the work that has to get done. It's an opportunity cost. We only have a fixed amount of time. The tasks and the work get done as an outgrowth of those relationships, as an outgrowth of those conversations. If I build rapport with somebody and I trust them and I like them, I want to have their back. I want to do the work that supports my team, supports my leader.
That's great points. And so tell me, and I really want us to get into the meat of this, of what can leaders do to change this? Is there a better way of doing it? Well, what does it look like?
Yeah, I think there's an element of picking up on energy levels and focus and making sure that people are in the space, have that sense of presence. And I think there are some specific tips that we can talk about how leaders can create that. There's to put on my egghead psychology hat, there's a theory of motivation, self-determination theory, and that sense that belongingness and connection are motivating. And that sense that I belong to something, that I'm connected to something, my team, the people in this meeting, the company as a whole, that's motivating. And like I said before, that's going to generate the work. That's going to be how it helps get the work done.
Mm-hmm. I think we can have so much to say on company culture and building trust, but I won't let us go down that huge rabbit hole, except for, I think, that really great tip that we want to share here, which is a really simple check-in for leaders to use at the beginning of each meeting. And at Well Leaders, and I know a few other leaders who use this check-in, it's called rose-bud-thorn. And Will, maybe we can go back and forth describing what the rose-bud-thorn is. And key is you start this meeting with this check-in right at the beginning. It's a personal check-in, not a work check-in. And you go around talking, sharing your rose-bud-thorn. So, Will, what's the rose?
Yeah, and before I get to the rose, I just want to say it really helps when leaders do this first. They don't become the last one to say it. When they're the first one to say it, they model what we'll talk about in each of the three pieces of the check-in, the humanness of it. So the rose is what's going well. What is kind of a solid good thing that's going on for you, and just bring your personal self to the table. It doesn't have to be a super personal detail. It can be kind of a personal connection to maybe the work that you're doing, but don't make it about the work either. Bring yourself to the table when you talk about something good that is going on for you right now. So the next one is the bud. Lauren, what's the bud?
Yeah, the bud is what's emerging for you. So you might have just received a phone call from a cousin that they're coming out to stay in your local town. You haven't seen them for a while and you're quite excited about what's to come. It might be something just related to that something is about to spring open. You can picture a bud, the newly formed bud on a plant that it's about to open up into a flower. That's what's emerging. And the final one is the thorn. Well, what's the thorn?
Yeah, and I'll also say for the bud, like learning and growth are very much in that bud mode of sharing. And the last one, the thorn, I actually think this is probably the most valuable piece of it. And the rose and the bud can set up the thorn because you're sharing a little bit of kind of what your experience is in personal details. The thorn is what's not going so well. What is that thorn that's getting stuck in your side, or you grab the rose and you get a little prick from the thorn. What's not going so well. And this lets everybody know, look, it's not, everything's not rosy, everything's not positive. I may not be at 100% today. And some days we've done rosebud and thorn and we say, I don't have a thorn today. That's cool too. Maybe you are just running on all cylinders. But if you're not, bringing that to the table and say, I mean, some of the worst thorns I've heard, my dog died. yesterday, and I'm thinking about that and grieving that loss. I'm half here today, but the half that I am bringing to the table is going to make a contribution, and I want to be here for all of you. So that way, if we're working together later in the day, you have some important context for where my focus is, where my attention is, what I'm bringing to the table today. And it just creates that sense of human connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it opens up the door for team members to step in when they're needed, and that sense of this is how I can help really is a rewarding way for us to increase our own well-being.
Yeah, definitely agree.
And Will, I know you and I have both spoken a lot about authentic leadership, and I really see this rose-bud-thorn as one of those strategies to really bring out that sense of being an authentic leader and living it. Just being able to focus on the balance in authentic leadership. You want to have balanced decision making. That rose-bud-thorn is a perfect example of having that balance, as well as being open and authentic, that you're not lying, I don't want to say lying, but you're really being honest and open with what's happening around you.
Yeah, and I think people in our line of work talk about like the work persona and the facade, and this helps drop that a little bit, and bringing yourself to work and kind of having your personal values show up in work is really critical to be motivated and connected. Yeah. A question for you, Lauren. What about leaders who say, yeah, I don't have time for this?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question. And I was also thinking of your question earlier, Will, of what about the introverts and how are we going to manage them? So I hope we can both talk to those questions here. But yeah, if you don't have time, I think and Will, you mentioned earlier, efficiency is super important for a lot of our leaders. You need to get through things in a timely manner by the end of the meeting. So we can't be spending 10, 15 minutes on each check-ins, especially if you have talkers in your group. This can be a disaster if you let them go run away. And so the advice that I give to all of our leaders is set a 1-minute timer and tell your group that you're setting 1-minute timer. Everyone will have a minute to go around and the timer buzzes. You can also defer the buzzing to the timer, and you're not the one that's saying, okay, move along. Everyone hears the buzzers. It's a very neutral way of going around. And most of the time, people won't even need the timer. They're aware subconsciously that the timer is there, and it'll move the conversation around really easily. What would you say about the introverts? I have one thing that's popped to mind. Has anything popped to mind for you?
I'd say that's another reason why it's important for the leader to go first. And if the leader is an introvert, practice it in your smallest meetings first. Practice it in a one-on-one conversation. Hey, let's just do a quick rose-bud-thorn. Start with small stakes, not the most pressure-packed meetings where your bosses are also involved. And then as a leader, if you know they're introverts, maybe reach out to them ahead of time and say, hey, I'm going to start this new thing. There have been meetings where I know it's hard for you to speak up. I'm paying attention to that, and I understand that. And from time to time, if somebody's having a particularly tough day, you can give them a pass. Say, hey, I know this is going on. You feel free to pass if you need to.
Yeah, I love that balancedness of really checking in where people are at in your meeting, and it's actually up to them. So bringing in that autonomy into your meetings, I think, is a really great way to build more trust. The one idea that I had around this too is I know that introverts really like clarity on what's to come. So if you minimize some of that uncertainty and make sure that you've, like you said, spoken to them before and say, this is what we're doing, they can always jot down some notes of what it is that they would like to say in each one. I think that does a world of good for introverts because they have control over the situation more than they would normally.
Yeah, completely. And when we've been in meetings and we've done check-ins, if it's a check-in that comes out of left field, like you can see the blank look and the mind racing. Oh goodness, what is it that I have as my rose-bud-thorn? And it's 3 pieces of information that you're bringing into play here. So sometimes it's not easy to come up with on the spot, especially if you're not as comfortable speaking up. So sometimes a heads up can be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I think we're at time. Will, do you want to sum it up for us, and then we can do a quick yeah, we'll put some links in the comments below that you can check out, and you can sign up for our mailing list. But yeah, Will, how would you describe this in a beautiful few sentences?
Oh yeah, no pressure. Beautiful sentences. Well, I think it starts with the context that we're living in. This is always important. This stuff is always important, but it's particularly important in the virtual remote environment. And I think we want to disrupt that meeting as usual, which is leaving people feeling a bit disconnected from one another, and also understand that this is not an opportunity cost. These relationships that you're building with these check-ins will lead to the work. The conversations are the work. And so starting with a meeting check-in, rose-bud-thorn, bringing that humanness to the table, building that context for team members to understand what everybody's showing up with is super valuable. And then as a leader, just understand the group. And this part of this check-in is understanding the group better. Understand your introverts, understand your talkers, manage the group as best you can, and it will pay dividends. We've seen it in the work we've done. We've seen it in the leaders that we've worked with.
Yeah, thanks, Will. We challenge all our leaders listening, try it out in your next meeting, the rose-bud-thorn. And if you have any questions, post them below, and you're always welcome to reach out to either of us.
Definitely. Thanks, Lauren.